Listen, they didn't overpay for Milton Williams. They had some free agent losses, but they have drafted so well. Philadelphia's number one. They are smart enough to know who to pay for and who to let go. And I thought all their moves made sense to me. Zach Bond, bringing him back to linebacker, surprised me a little at that price point. But again, I'm going to give Philadelphia the benefit here. It remains the deepest roster with the most dexterity. And with that, Nick Wright.
No, with that, not Nick Wright. You're surprised that they got Zach Bond because you think they paid him too much, or that they were able to get like a great deal on him? Because that was a great signing and a great deal. Made everyone happy all around. Yeah, I think, listen, things like this are always a little tricky, obviously this far out, especially because we know the Philadelphia Eagles are going to have to do some damage in the draft. I think if they can find it, and this is not, this is so much easier said than done, but if they find this season, this draft's Cooper, DeJean, and Mitchell, I mean, like, it's a wrap, right? You draft another two players who are like out the gate, ready to ball, and like literal Super Bowl ballers, then it's just like my goodness, it's just game set match at that point. I always push back on automatically crowning the previous team to win the Super Bowl. I will always do that. I think in this context right now, it makes sense to have them number one, especially considering how the Super Bowl was won, obviously, just annihilating the Kansas City Chiefs. But I'm not going to just like automatically, really crown anyone for that matter, because if I'm looking at all these teams right now, the way how I've done this for the previous teams is when I just look at these 10 teams, and let's just say I take this at face value that these are legitimately the top 10 teams, and it doesn't matter what order, but like these are just the top 10 teams right here. And it was like, if we were to play all again, and this is where it's hard because these teams have changed now, right? They've legitimately have changed, and we haven't seen what they look like. And so the problem is when you ask yourself that question, you're remembering the Eagles dominate the Kansas City Chiefs, but that's a different team now. You're remembering the Baltimore Ravens coming up short against the Bills, different team, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But what can't be denied at this point, and this is what I said last season, all during last season, I said the best thing that the Kansas City Chiefs the best thing that they have going for them, because it was like, yeah, they don't look all that great this season, right? We talked a lot about that during the season. I said, but it is hard. You can't ever really count them out, because the biggest thing that they have over any of these other teams is we know that they know how to win. We know that in the playoffs, no one on the Kansas City Chiefs is going to be shell-shocked, although they did seem to be shell-shocked against the Philadelphia Eagles. But I think that was just because the Eagles were just so much of a superior team that's just what happens. I don't, no matter how prepared you are, if the team is just that much better than you, there's nothing you can do. But they weren't shell-shocked against the Bills, Texans, etc. And so that's the best thing that they had going for them. Patrick Mahomes, Andy Reid, Spags, even Travis Kelce older, like they've just been there so many times that's going to give them a huge advantage, even over a team that's potentially playing better at the time, like the Bills, the Ravens, any of these other random AFC teams that they might have had to face in the playoffs, right? If they had to go up against Justin Herbert and the Chargers, or Bo Nix and the Broncos, it was like, advantage Kansas City without a doubt. And that was one of the big advantages the Philadelphia Eagles especially had against the Commanders, because it was like, if you're the Eagles, you're just like, dude, like, we've been here before. Like, this is your first time ever. This is the biggest game of your career. This is just another game for us. And that's when I said, then even in the Super Bowl, I was like, Fangio and Kellen Moore, I was like, this is the biggest game for those coordinators compared to according to like Spags and Andy. And I was like, this is just another big game for them. They've already done this so many times. So it's not, and it would be like the greatest achievement for the Eagles if they can win. And it would just be another notch in Andy and Spags' belt, unless you want to really heighten the pressure of a three-peat. But, with all of that said, at this point, now, if we just, we don't even have to go back to 2017, 2018, but just looking at in the last 3 years, a chunk of this team now has been to 2 Super Bowls. They've, at a minimum, the vast majority of this team has won a Super Bowl. You know, they've been there, and now even players who we know have now been there, obviously for longer. The Jalen Hurtses, AJ Devontae. It's like they've legitimately been up and down, which I remain is incredibly important to develop as an athlete, as a person, but definitely an athlete in the NFL. You need to know what it's like to be in the Super Bowl and have the other team's colors confetti, falling out of the sky. You need to have that feeling. You need to have that feeling of having the next year being like, we're gonna get there back, let's go, only to get rocked, and play an awful game against the Buccaneers. You need that. You need to know what it's like to be like, all right, this year is going to be different. And then you start off kind of 2-2. You drop a ball, you lose to the Falcons, and this and that. Then you get beat by the Bucs. You deal with it. Like that's all part of it. And now, I mean, like, what adversity have they not faced? You had the AJ Brown and Jalen Hurts, and you had all this type of stuff, right? The media pouncing, not only the local media, but then the national media. Like they've just been through it. Then even going into the Super Bowl, being doubted, obviously every step of the way, and then winning in spectacular fashion. I mean, they've checked every single box. Like, what have they not actually experienced now? Even someone like a Saquon Barkley, who was not part of that whole ride with them, he still dealt with his own levels of adversity, having to deal with, like, do I play against the New York Giants to try to break that record or not? What does that look like for me? And not to mention, he's already struggled plenty in New York, so he's already gone through that, through all of that nonsense. He knows what it's like to play for just a fundamentally bad team to its core. So he's got to see his jerseys be, lit on fire, etc., etc. So the Eagles have had fights on the sideline, fights, I say that very loosely, disagreements or, on the sidelines. Like they've just had it all. So the level of experience and maturity that they have runs so deep. And you can't even now say, outside of coaching for the Kansas City Chiefs, because Andy and Spags have just been around there forever and have obviously won multiple Super Bowls, which you can't say that about the Eagles necessarily. But like the players now, because the Kansas City Chiefs are getting new players and et cetera, et cetera. You can't now like automatically give the Kansas City Chiefs that kind of like, well, they have the experience that none of these other teams have. Mahomes has a ton of experience, no doubt about that. Travis Kelce does, but who the heck knows what Kelce's going to look like this coming season. And again, you're going to have some people who have like experience, but Xavier Worthy doesn't. Again, you're going to have like a Chris Jones, Rashee Rice. But I just think that this Eagles team now, like, they do feel like they're all in the driver's seat, but at the same time, I think it's so crucial for them to just not be like, we're the best team going into this season. I think it's got to be one of those things that it's re-earned, that it's just like, nope, week one, everyone's 0. Who's the best team? What's top 10? Like every player should just be like, we're about to find out. We're going to find out. You want to have the confidence and the belief in yourself, but like, no, we're going to find out, right? We're going to play. That's why we play. Wasn't there a commercial like that? That's why we play. So that's why I always took such issue, because again, when the Kansas City Chiefs fans kept saying, oh, we imagine doubting, the reigning Super Bowl champions, et cetera, et cetera. And every time Nick Wright would do that, they haven't lost a playoff game since, 1974. And it was just like, dude, like the majority of this team isn't even the same team. Was DeAndre Hopkins playing there? Was Hollywood Brown playing? Wasn't Pacheco there? Well, now he's injured, and it was just like, I don't understand. Clearly different cast of characters. So, the Eagles will kind of have to deal with that in their own way. I'm also curious to see if there's another step, and we'll talk about this later as the weeks go on, months go on for that matter. Is there another step, another gear for Jalen Hurts? I don't mean like a forced one where he's got to prove that he can carry a team and win and get a regular season MVP. But I'm just curious if there's a continued smoothness to his game, a continued lack of turnovers, a priority of winning, really smart ball. In the playoffs especially, he really started to prioritize getting down. He would use his legs, but then he would get down. He slid a lot, which I'm always a fan of. He was taking less big hits, especially after the Rams game, after he really kind of messed up his knee a little bit. And I just wonder if he can continue to do that, because once upon a time people would have said, he's a power runner type quarterback, and you don't want to take that away from him because that's what kind of makes him special. But now he's shown to be such, you know, an elite, big time game manager. And again, you guys know this. I say game manager in like the most positive way ever. And, you know, playmaker, multiple Super Bowls, conference championship games, that him being able to manage these games and just make such high level decisions at this point is more of his superpower than him being able to rip off a 44-yard touchdown. Don't get me wrong. Those are important. And he even did it in the Super Bowl, ripping off, you know, multiple like 19, 20-yard runs, which were huge. But again, that was so much more of his intelligence and quick decision making, more of his processing, rather than just his pure athleticism finding ways through it. At least that was my interpretation of how. Because again, you saw a little bit of the hesitation and the you know, can't think of a great word right now, but the fogginess when Patrick Mahomes was dealing with the pressure, and it led to him not being able. And that's what I highlighted so much during that. It was like there was multiple moments where both Jalen Hurts and Patrick Mahomes were dealt where there was a second where it was like, all right, the pressure's getting to me. What am I going to do? Jalen Hurts was able to escape, make a big play, make a big throw. Patrick Mahomes was either getting tackled or throwing an interception. So some of it is just composure and decision making, and that's what I want to be able to continue to see Jalen Hurts. It's the fact that he's just like this, no matter what, to me is a superpower. So I'm just curious what if there's an evolution to that as things continue. If he becomes more confident even in his own style of play, if he becomes more confident in being like, I don't got to do anything to prove to anyone. You know, I'm just gonna do what I want to do. I'm just gonna play my way. I'm excited to see what that looks like, honestly, and just kind of how the relationship develops also with a new offensive coordinator. But those are just my thoughts. I'd absolutely love to hear yours. What do you guys all think about the Philadelphia Eagles being number one, according to Colin Cowherd on his herd hierarchy post-free agency? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single comment, so whether you agree with me or disagree with me, either way, let's get in some discussions. Let's get in some fights. But ultimately, let's just have some fun. And please do consider subscribing. We're building an amazing community here, and I absolutely love to see you part of it. I want to build something that we all genuinely feel connected to. Something that we're really excited to be part of. I think we're on our way to doing it. And please don't forget to give this video a thumbs up, as it really does help the visibility and the algorithm. Thank you so much. See you next time.